Hi there. Santa Claus? Oh, hi, I'm Marc. I used to be a senior artist at Blizzard Entertainment, and now I teach art for a living. In this colorful episode of my weekly series that I've been calling YouTube Art School, I'm going to show you a recipe to color your drawings. Something that's going to work in any painting software and also for simple or more complex drawings like this. And it's surprisingly simple. You're about to level up your coloring skills big time. Quickly, let's get this class started. Alright, class is in session. Pay attention. Today, I want to share with you a simple recipe, or simple steps to color your drawings. The twist here is that this will work particularly well for more complex drawings like the one that I have today, but just as well if I only had one character. Similar to an older video that I made, the process also allows you to post updates on social media along the way, since there are like 3 to 4 main milestones that we're going to hit, and each time you should have something that looks good enough to share, instead of working on a painting that's gonna look like hot garbage the whole time before coming together only in the end. Anyways, let's get started. First, wait a minute, I almost forgot. First, you gotta pay the class fee of either 1 like or 1 sub. All this expert knowledge isn't free, you know, but also not very expensive, so make sure that you pay. Now, the real first step. We're going to need a clean drawing to color. So, of course, right from the start, you have something worth posting. If your line art isn't clean enough for you to post, it's not clean enough to start coloring. That's done. Easy. Now we just gotta get the line art ready to start coloring. We have a few things to set up here. I recommend splitting the different parts of the drawing onto their own layers to keep things flexible. Here I set each of the 4 characters on their own layers, and then I have the desk on its own, the foreground elements, the books here and the jug, and then the background. Now we're ready to go. Next, we'll slap on some flat colors on here. As a quick tip, don't worry about the actual colors just yet. Initially, we're only interested in filling areas that share an identical material with the same color. Your colors don't need to be perfect, we can always edit them later. Do this step on a single layer set to the normal blending mode, underneath your line art layer, which will be set to multiply blend mode. Simple so far. To paint in the flat colors, you can use a hard brush or the lasso tool, whatever you prefer. But here's another tip that I got when I used to color comics many years ago. Uncheck the anti-alias option if you can find it while you work on the flats. This will give you cleaner results, specifically cleaner edges between regions when we use the paint bucket to adjust the colors once you finish with your flat colors. You can try with and without to see the difference. Now is a good time to finalize your color choices. If you're not sure how to select colors, have a look at my color theory class after this. Link in the description. Also, like I said last week, it's the holidays, which means I'm having the biggest discount of the year on my art school program, along with everything else in my store. Have a look. You'll find a link to my store in the description too, or in the top right corner of the screen. Happy holidays. Now we have something that looks pretty good. That's another one that you could post on social media, especially with some color corrections done here. Flats done. Now the third step can be swapped with the fourth step, but I find it easier to tackle lights early when the piece is more complex, since it often has the biggest impact on a composition. Best to get that sorted soon in the process. Now, before I start painting the lights, I like to do some quick mock-ups to test things out. I did 2 here, as you can see. It's super rough. I'm just using a soft brush on a layer on top of my stack, set to hard light mode or overlay mode, whatever works best. And I was hesitating between these 2, but I asked the family and they voted for this one, so that's the one I'll be going for. Here quickly, I have the various light sources identified in my scene. For the context of the video, I'll just use this one here, but adding more is simple. Just gotta repeat the same process that I'm about to show. My lights layer will be above the 2 previous layers, and I'll set that one to hard light blend mode. You can test with overlay mode too, but if the scene is darker, hard light works best since it's a more opaque blend mode, just FYI. In my case here, I'm imagining that this guy is casting like a spell to try and fix his doll, and his hands create a bubble of light all around her, since well, she's at the center of it. That's why she's being lit from the front and the back. A simpler light setup could be just a light source coming from above, like the sunlight or the moonlight, but I like it when it's challenging. The other characters in my scene though will be a lot easier. Anyways, she's lit enough. Repeat this process for every part of the drawing, one at a time. It's much easier that way, and you can always go back and make changes if needed, since everything is on its own layer. Lighting step, check. Now then, the next step is shading. For my shading layer here, I'm going to add this one right below the lights layer. We always want the lights on top. And set it to multiply blend mode. For shading, to make things easier, I like to control-click my flats layer to get a selection for the silhouette of the character, or whatever it is that you're selecting, and paint bucket it with white. This way I can lock my layer and I'll only be painting on the silhouette, nothing else. Magic. Why white? Because it's transparent when using the multiply blend mode. Now I'm going to be going over the whole thing and shading everything, one group at a time. I have individual classes for each of these steps, by the way, so check the description if you get stuck anywhere. There should be a class covering the topic, whatever it is. Amazing. The light step made everything pretty bright, but the shading should be bringing that down quite a bit, so make sure that you select mid-tones for your flat colors, in general at least. Not too bright, not too dark. And like I mentioned in my shading class, always start with the big volumes first and build up the small details on top of it. I like to use black a lot when shading, but that's only to keep it simple at the beginning. I'm going to end up going back to all my shading layers and tinting them different colors just to get a richer result overall. I'll do that a bit later. Oh, and also, if you're curious about the brush that I'm using, it's not the easiest to use, so it's in my advanced brush set, but it's amazing for this particular step. It's amazing for every step. I used it for probably like 80% of everything you see so far, line art included. It's a strange brush. On one side is a hard edge and on the other side is a soft edge. Anyways, there's a link to the brush set in the video description if you're curious. Meanwhile, my old wizard is starting to take shape finally. Let's try to toggle this on and off to see the difference. So it's definitely darkening things quite a bit, and right about now I think is a good time to merge our shading layer and our lines layer. So by now the two have become kind of the same. The whole point of the shading layers is to add an extra level of polish to the illustration, and I still have a lot of sketchiness here, a lot of brush strokes remaining from my line arts that are still visible that I'd like to get rid of. And so I'm just gonna go ahead, merge those two. Both of these layers already had the multiply blend mode, so I can just go back and select that again. And now, well, nothing should have changed except I have one fewer layer. And if I need to get rid of the sketchiness, well, I can just go back in here, smudge a little bit. So now I'm left with one layer to control everything that is darker in color, and one layer for the lights that is, well, everything that's brighter. And as you can see here, I already did that for my main character. Also, one more detail before I move on. But you probably noticed that one of the characters here disappeared, the one in the foreground. I was trying something different because the other version felt too 2D, didn't fit in the scene. I then painted this version here, which worked a little better, but it was always kind of overlapping the fingers. I didn't like that. It didn't really fit in the composition anymore. So in the end, I just ended up getting rid of it, and I'll be adding some body parts in the foreground here as a replacement. I also ended up spending a little bit more time on my lights layer, as well as adding a few more lights. So one here for the mage, our wizard here in the back, another light on the desk as well, some extra light for the second doll here. And then here I also spent extra time on the shading. So this is just the shading layers without the lights. And if I remove the flat so that we can only see the shading layer, you can see there's quite a bit of color in here now. So I just went ahead and quickly colorized a little bit my shading layer, basically tinting the different parts based on the color of the lights that I have on them. And when we piece this all together, turn on the lights, click, click, another one, another one, another one. Well, that looks a little better. And I'm still playing with just 3 layers, my flats, shading layer, and my lights. Now, if we get back to our list here, we're done with this, and we're at a point where, once again, we could share this on social media. If you've taken your time so far, you should have a clean drawing colored and shaded, maybe even with some lights. Technically, you could call it done here, but of course, let's get the last 2 steps done to make this pop some more. Starting with the materials. You know the drill. Once again, we're going to be adding a new layer on top of the stack for each of our groups. Call it materials and set it to hard light blend mode again. I'll use this layer to paint reflections on the various materials here in my scene. Paintings always look better when you have a variety of materials. Some shiny, some glossy, some matte, some metallic, some semi-translucent. More contrast in the materials is good. Now, we can kind of tell that some of their body parts are painted with a more glossy paint than the rest. And that's hot. I also spent some extra minutes to paint the materials for the desk and the wizard. So we can see here on the desk, a couple extra reflections, and on the wizard, so specifically a little bit more on the face and the bracers, kind of like this hard leather. I think it's slowly coming together. And also we can cross out this step. Done. Now all that's left is the ambiance. Now what exactly do I mean by that? Well, it's mostly going to have to do with bounce lights in the scene. And also it's going to help me to kind of recalibrate a little bit the values and the colors all over. And well, of course, there is a logic to it also. I'm trying to solve problems still. One being the contrast in values here in a lot of areas. So you can see on the shoulders here, dark shoulders against a dark background. That kind of stuff usually doesn't look too great. One thing I could do to solve this would be to add a little bit of light in between the character himself and the wall. Now the silhouette reads a lot better, and also we get a little bit of a blue halo all around her head, which kind of helps to bring a little more attention to her. Other times there's too much contrast, so for example here between her head and the background, and this brings a lot of attention to her, which I don't necessarily want as much. So once again, I can pop a new layer. These will all be set to hard light mode, and by brightening the background just locally here in this little area, and also I'm using the same layer to colorize a little bit of the old wizard. I'm essentially using this final step as a mean to help balance the piece better. It's all about contrast. I want a lot of contrast around my focal point, the main character here in the center, but I don't want as much for everything else. And finally, I'm just gonna add a couple more details here to show what's happening, how he's trying to fix her or destroy her. Oh, and one more thing, I'm gonna add a little bit of a shadow underneath her body here to, again, bring a little more contrast between her feet and the page that's kind of bright. To be fair, the shadow doesn't really make a whole lot of sense based on these light sources, but probably nobody's gonna notice. And now I can cross out the final step. I'm done. Well, for now at least. There's still a couple of things in here that I want to rework. It's still very, very rough in a bunch of areas, specifically the background and this guy's shirt and beard. Ugh, what a mess. But that's for another day. And that's going to be it for this week's class. Make sure that you follow me on Instagram to see the final result when I post it. It's my last painting of the year, so I want to make it count. And that aside, I hope the class was helpful. I don't necessarily recommend having 4 characters in your drawing. That was a lot to paint. But the quantity doesn't impact the process. It's all the same whether you have 1 or 10 of them. I really like this workflow and I hope that you do too. And if you try it, let me know. Show me even. Don't hesitate to tag me on social media. I love to see what you guys create. I can't reply to everything, you know how it is, but I do see it all, just like I read every comment here on YouTube. Happy holidays, and don't forget to take advantage of the sale on my art school